Ladies, I am very excited. Today, I have a special guest that I've brought in to help us when specific situations come up. And let me just give you a little background of why this is happening. Recently, in our Facebook group, the Women's Ministry Toolbox Facebook group, a leader asked a question. She was looking for wisdom and advice on how to proceed and what to do. She had a woman that she was counseling. She was really concerned about. She knew she was depressed. There was acknowledgement of that, but some other things were going on that were of concern. And there was some question as to whether or not this woman might be suicidal. And so she wasn't sure what to do. Maybe you've been in that same situation. I know I have in the past. And if you haven't, there's a really good chance this could happen and you may not know what to do. So I have brought my friend, David Brannock, to talk with us, to give us some advice. And as you'll hear, there are a couple reasons I specifically thought of him when I was thinking we need an expert, because I am not one. So David came to mind because he's an expert, but also because of the story that he has. I met David through a speaker network that we are involved in. And so that's how God connected us and gave me this glimpse. And I'm really excited for you to hear what he has to say on this topic today. So David, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Cyndee.
David, why don't you start by telling us about your background and a little bit about your story?
Okay. I grew up with loving parents and two brothers, raised in a Christian home. I also grew up with a lot of depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, when I was growing up back in the 70s, going to counseling was not a thing that people did, and if you did, you certainly didn't want anybody to know about it because it was considered shameful. What, are you crazy? Well, we don't shame people who are sick for going to the doctor, but anyway. And although that stigma is not what it once was, it's still there even today. And so when I was in my 20s, I began going to counseling for the first time, and off and on through the years, I would go. When I got to about 10 years ago, I went through a midlife crisis. Now, I didn't go get a motorcycle, still married to my wife, but I still had a crisis nonetheless. And of my vocation and what God was doing, what God was not doing. And so it was not a matter of, well, if you had more faith. I had plenty of faith in God. What I had was also plenty of questions. And I was tired, I was worn out. And I got to the place where I began having thoughts that if I went to sleep and didn't wake up, it wouldn't be okay. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Now, thank God I have never gone down the road of actively making a plan to die by suicide. But I do know what it's like to go through a season where life is so overwhelming that, Lord, if in your mercy you took me home, it'd be okay because at least the problem would go away. And so then I got some more concentrated help voluntarily, and that helped. And then God used that to begin to renew me. And then in 2019, I went back to school to get a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And so now that's what I do today. And I come at it from the intersection of faith and mental health, because I think I neglected in my story to mention to your audience, I was a pastor for 20 years. So faith was not an issue for me. It was not believing more. It was a matter of, but God, what are you doing? It was the questions. And so, yes, even people of faith can feel like they're out of hope.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Thank you. for sharing that with us. I know that's a really personal story to you, and we appreciate you
Yes.
being vulnerable with us. I even as you're talking, there are names coming to mind of women that I know that I suspect feel the way that you felt in those specific moments. And so my heart just goes out to them. And that
Mhm.
makes me wonder, how do we differentiate? How do we know the difference between someone who's just depressed and someone that is truly suicidal? And then we'll talk here in a little bit. What do we do?
Mhm. A lot of people get depressed who never even think about, well, if I went to sleep and didn't wake up, it would be okay. But there's also a significant number of people who get depressed who actually have the thoughts.
Okay.
When it comes to suicide, there are three elements we check for. One is, do you have the thoughts? And then number two is, do you have a plan? And
Okay.
then number three, do you have the means to carry out that plan? And so, every time somebody answers yes, then it gets more and more, we get more and more concerned. But simply to, boy, I'm just worn out. I want this problem to go away. That's not being suicidal,
Okay.
even though the thoughts are there. Like in First Kings chapter 19, I preached on that at my church and talked about mental health and shared a little bit about my story. And I said, Elijah, a great spiritual leader, Elijah, he went into the desert and he curled up under a broom tree and he said, Lord, just take my life. And he went to sleep. I don't believe Elijah was suicidal. I believe he was just worn out and depressed. And I shouldn't say just, like, to minimize it, but I don't think he actually wanted to harm himself. I
Okay.
think he'd had enough and he wanted God to step in and help him. And so when someone gets to the point where they just see no hope and it's never going to get better, that's when depression then crosses that line into suicidality. And I think the only way to know that is to ask somebody, to have a conversation with them about where they are.
That was going to
Because
be
they're
my
probably,
next question. Do we
yeah,
straight up ask them, are you like, what do we literally say, are you planning to kill yourself?
are you having thoughts? Because, and then there's a myth. So I'm glad you asked me that, Cyndee. There's a myth that well-meaning people have had, that have believed that they feel like, well, if I ask somebody if they're thinking about harming themselves, dying by their own hand, then I will plant the idea in their mind to go do it. And that's simply not true. The evidence doesn't bear that out. We're actually more likely to save their life than to cause it to end, because now that person can say, somebody sees me, somebody
Okay.
actually is paying attention, they're noticing that I'm not in a good place right now. I have in front of me what's called the Columbia Suicide Risk Protocol. And I know obviously you can't read that on the screen,
We'll
but
put a
there is
link
an
though. I will link
but there
that
is
so
an
that,
app that anybody can download on their phone, and it has these questions. And so I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll walk through
yeah,
the
please
questions.
do.
So the first question, but I think in general, just, you seem really down. Are you having any thoughts about harming yourself? A
Okay.
general question, and then listen to what they say. On the suicide protocol, the first question is, have you wished you were dead or wished you could go to sleep and not wake up? And this is in the past month. They're saying, looking back in the last month, because obviously for me, that answer, well, 10 years ago, but it doesn't apply now. So, so it's just in the last month. Then number two, have you actually had any thoughts about killing yourself? And if they answer, well, no, it was just some thoughts, but that's it, then okay, still they should talk to somebody,
Mhm.
but We don't need to go call anybody right then. We don't need to panic. It's, the risk is still pretty low.
Okay.
There's some risk, but it's still fairly low. Now, if they said, yes, I have had thoughts in the past month about actually killing myself, then the third question is, have you thought about how you might do it? So now we're beginning to ask, is there a plan?
Okay.
And then if they, no, don't have a plan. Okay, well, now we're getting to the intermediate level, but still, you want, it's but it's a good sign if they say no, that they don't have a plan yet. We don't want them to come up with one.
Oh, yeah.
But if they
Definitely
say,
not.
well, I have had some thoughts about that, then the next question is, have you had any intention of acting on these thoughts of killing yourself, as opposed to you have the thoughts, but you definitely would not act? And then the next question is, if they say yes, have you started to work out, or have you worked out the details of how to kill yourself? Did you intend to carry out the plan? And then the last question you always ask, no matter what, is, have you done anything, started to do anything, or prepared to do anything to end your life, such as collect pills, obtain a gun, give away valuables, write a will or suicide note, you held a gun but changed your mind, you cut yourself, tried to hang yourself, etc.
Right.
If someone indicates that they actually have the intention of wanting to harm themselves, that is when that person needs to seek immediate help.
So tell
And
me what that means exactly. Do we
yes,
dial 911? Do we think of, as a women's ministry leader, do I call my pastor?
that is one option. And whatever you do, you stay with that person. You do not let them walk out of your office and go home.
Okay.
If they say, well, I'll drive myself to the ER, don't let them do that alone. No.
Okay.
Somebody go with them to the ER, or you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that number is on the protocol. The good news about that, the National Suicide Lifeline, is that July 16th, a new number is to go into effect, 988.
Okay.
I was reading that recently. So we have 911. Well, this would be 988. And it 24/7, 365. And that individual can talk with a trained mental health counselor.
Gotcha.
But 911, law enforcement may not be trained in that. One thing law enforcement can do, as opposed to the 1-8 or the lifeline number, is they can come to where you are, and they can keep that person from being a danger to themselves. True. And take them to the ER. So whatever has to happen, but contact somebody who could be of help and stay with them until they can be evaluated. Then if they're evaluated and they're really okay, then you've done your due diligence. So I hope that helps. So simply having thoughts, we start to get concerned, but it's when they say, yes, I'm intend to do this. I have a plan. I have a means. I've got a gun in my car, or got pills at home, or what have you. Now, there is always the possibility that someone will say they're in a good place or they're okay, and then 2 days later we find out that they died by suicide. If that happens, of course, that's very tragic. It's not the norm, but it can happen. I would say it would be probably one of two things happen. Sometimes suicide is a spur of the moment decision.
Okay.
And, they might seem fine, whatever, and then just something happens and boom, they make a snap decision, pull out the gun. That's it. There's nothing we could do about that.
Yeah, true.
We did our part. Or the other thing is, somebody has gotten to the place where they've made up their mind, they're going to do this no matter what. And they're going to tell us what they think we want to hear. And they're just, they're biding their time till they can do it.
Right.
That's the exception.
Okay.
But the
That's good
norm
to
is
know.
people will be honest and they'll tell you they're actually relieved that somebody notices, because I think most people who threaten it really don't want to die. They just haven't figured out a better way to make the problem go away.
Right. They don't know
So
how
they
to
will
ask
be
for help, I
honest
would
with you.
suspect too.
I'm sorry.
They may not know how to ask for help either.
Right. They may not know how to ask for help. They may think, well, I'm the only one. And then people can believe all kind of lies because, we're coming at this from a faith aspect. There's all kind of lies people believe. Well, the world would be better off without me. I'm a burden to people. I'm a disappointment. I'm a failure. God doesn't like me, whatever. But anytime someone is so troubled that they are thinking about ending their life at their own hand, there are lies that they have believed.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely. So
That is,
hopefully that they would be honest and about where they are, because I think most people would want to find a better way out.
yeah, I think you're right. That is so helpful. And I'm so glad you walked through those questions with us. So tell us one more time what the name of that app is called.
It's the Columbia Protocol.
Okay.
The Columbia Protocol app. And so it will assess suicide risk. I have it on my phone, and you can walk you
Later,
through
download that app. I mean, that's my suggestion to you. Go ahead and
Anybody,
download it. So you're not waiting for it to download. If the need arises, you have it on your phone. It's right there and you can easily access it, and it'll walk you right through those questions. Right, David?
Right.
That's
And at the
excellent.
end, it will say if someone has said yes, then this is what you do. So
Okay.
it takes all the guesswork out of it.
That's good.
And, it's better safe than sorry. It's better to ask someone, are you having these thoughts? No, they're not, than to not ask and wish you had. And it's better for someone to go be evaluated and find out they didn't need to be than to, oh, they're okay. And then, well, they
Oh,
should have been.
yeah, absolutely. We want
Err
to
on
err
the
on.
side of caution.
That's exactly what I was going to say, which kind of brings me up to a follow-up question. Because as women's ministry leaders, a lot of us are volunteers. We're not on staff. We don't have any crisis training, most of us. When, and I know this is like tricky because, it varies on the situation, but when do we contact like our pastor at the church? Do we have to bring them in? Should they be aware if we have concerns? Where's that line kind of at?
Hmm. If it's a case where, in general, it's always better if the individual would voluntarily let the pastor know what's going on.
Okay.
Now, in a case where, again, God forbid, knock on wood, if something happened and they reach this crisis point where according to the protocol, yes, we need to contact somebody. I think in a case like that, where if we're having to bring in outside people for a crisis evaluation, to me, again, what would that person, if other people are already knowing about it, would they really be upset if you went and told the pastor, hey, this is what's going on with one of your flock? I mean, other people are knowing anyway. That's not a secret.
Right.
Cat's out of the bag. And the pastor be a great support person. So it certainly would not be punitive, but as an additional help.
Okay.
But in general, it's always better if the individual themselves can say, hey, this is what's going on.
That's a good point. Maybe we even need to ask permission and encourage them. Hey, would you like to set, why have you thought about sitting down with one of the pastors? I can help you set up an appointment. Or maybe even asking them, do you mind if I tell Pastor Rob or whatever their name is, so that they can be praying for you? Because,
Thank you
and I
for
think that,
saying that. I should have phrased it that way, because as much as we can to give that individual power,
okay.
yes, you phrased it so much better than I did, Cyndee. Because they're feeling so powerless that life has gotten the best of them. So anything we can do, you know, is it okay? That they can say yes, that they can give their permission to, that would be beneficial.
Okay.
Yes.
Because it's hard. Sometimes we want to honor those confidences and we don't want to break those. But at the same time, when it gets to a situation like this where we're not sure what's going on and we're really concerned and worried, we get scared. We don't want to mess up. We don't want to cause more harm to this person or feel
Right.
like something we did has led them to cause harm to themselves. So
Absolutely.
it's a tough situation. So I appreciate your advice and counsel on that.
Well, you're welcome. I in the counseling space, when somebody comes in for their intake session, the paperwork, even before they walk in the door, it says there are limits to confidentiality with your therapist.
Yeah.
And one is if you indicate that you're going to harm yourself.
That is a good point.
I,
Even you have to do something as their
I have to
counselor.
by law,
And
because
we,
if I don't,
yeah.
then there are legal consequences for me. If I don't. So
Do you
yes.
know, do we have to report? Like I know with social work as a former teacher, if I saw abuse, I had to report that. So do you know and I know some of it varies by state, but can you maybe just address it generally? What are things that we need to maybe even just find out in our state, we need to legally report it? Does that make sense?
That would be a good thing to find out. I would think if someone is in a leadership position, probably the law would be that if someone reports that they're going to harm themselves, harm someone else, report abuse of a child or abuse of an elderly person. Um, those are the four exceptions that
Okay.
I always go over in the counseling space. If teachers have that, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say, but I would definitely look into that. But I would suspect that even in the church, someone came to their pastor, one of the pastors, and said, and they went through the protocol, then the pastor would have to break confidentiality.
Okay.
And, so in this day and age, I don't know that anybody could legitimately. It's better to, again, err on the side of caution if someone is saying that they intend to hurt themselves.
Yeah, we definitely, and I want to make sure we make that clear. If they are saying they're going to harm themselves, ladies, you need to take action. Period.
Yes.
End of story. Do not sit on that. And
Yes.
you do not have to jump and call the church office. Go ahead and call the suicide line, call 911 if you want to. Don't wait to talk to a pastor.
Right.
We need you to act.
Go with them to the ER or have, depending on who it is, or is there a family member that could come quickly to drive them? I mean, so, as long if someone says that, but if they're calm and they're in your office, we don't want to freak out like, someone's in cardiac arrest.
Gotcha.
But you're right, though.
We can calmly take action. You can take a breath.
Yes.
Figure out the next plan forward. But like you said earlier, don't let them leave your office.
Right. You're with
or
them.
wherever you're meeting, stay with them the whole time. Without sharing too many details, there was a situation with a woman at a church. It's been many years. Just those of you who know me now do not know her. I sat with her on the kitchen floor and waited for her husband to come home. It had to do with some medication she was on, actually, that had gotten her all out of balance. And I needed to take the kids so that he could take her to the hospital. And she was in crisis and she was in trouble and she was suicidal at that moment. And it was very scary walking through that. That was, as a matter of fact, when I got the call, one thing I did do was I had a mentor that I trusted completely. And I called her and I said, I need you to pray. And as I drove, gosh, sorry, this is like, I hadn't talked about this in a long time. As I drove to her house, because I was just intent on not breaking any speed barriers, trying to get there, but getting there as fast as I could. And I had her praying over her and the situation on the phone until I could get there. And that was a huge help to me to get me in the right space of mind so that I could just sit there with her. Sorry, y'all, it's a very tender spot. But
it is.
That brings me to, what are things that we can say that are encouraging? Not necessarily, let's set aside the people that are suicidal, because we know we need to take action, but the woman who's depressed, who feels like, maybe you said earlier that, she went to sleep and she woke up in heaven, that would be okay. She's just weary and she's worn out. What are some things that we can say that might be encouraging and make an impact?
The first thing is to acknowledge feelings and try as much as possible to avoid jumping in and giving advice.
Okay.
For instance, like, if someone is really down and I say, oh, you've got a lot to live for, they know that, but they want to be heard. And so to speak to the emotions, and, boy, you're really having a hard time. You seem like you're in a really dark place. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really helps to be heard. They, intellectually in their head, they know the advice that we're wanting to share. It's what I would, sometimes when I've been in therapy, I would tell my counselor, I know it up here, tell it to my gut. My gut hasn't gotten the message. There's a disconnect from here to here. That's what needs to hear it. This is, so, and to be with them, and as much as possible to not rush in and try to fix anything, to sit with them. Like, so Job and the three friends, Job's three friends did great the first 7 days. They sat with Job and didn't say anything. It was when they opened their mouth that the problem started.
That's true.
But the first 7 days,
give great advice.
So sometimes we don't even have to say anything to be there.
Yeah.
One of my professors, she talked about climbing down into the pit and just sitting beside them in the pit with them.
I like that picture.
And instead of trying to, here, let me, throw a rope down and hoist you out, first acknowledge where they are and talk about their feelings. And the Holy Spirit will give you those words. I can't remember the scripture reference, but would do not worry about what you will say when, and I know a little different context, but still, I think it still applies.
Oh yeah. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask God and he will give it to you. That's in James.
Yes. And in that moment, Lord, bring to mind, what do I need to say right now?
And sometimes he'll say, don't say anything. Just like you said.
Yes, exactly. And that's okay too.
Just hand them a tissue if they're crying, hold their hand if they're willing. I think we feel this pressure that, especially as we're leaders, that we need to go in there and say this amazing prayer over the situation. And we need to offer all these platitudes, which leads me to one more question for you is, what are the things we should not say to them? You kind of hinted around it, but I wondered if you had some specific phrases maybe to avoid in those situations.
I
know one that comes to mind that I've heard people say is, don't just tell them they need to have more faith or they need to pray about it.
Oh, well, yes. I've heard well-meaning people say, well, I'm too blessed to be depressed.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And I want to say, well, first of all, I'm thankful that you're in a good place.
That's very gracious of you.
Well, We're recording this call, so for a female audience. So, but that same person never says, I'm too blessed to need insulin.
Right.
I'm too blessed to need chemotherapy.
Yeah.
If they have the flu, I'm too blessed to need Tamiflu. But sometimes people need some medication for a season.
Yeah.
They may not need medication at all. Some may need it the rest of their life. Some may just need it for a season to calm things down, so that to give their coping skills a fighting chance to then address what's going on. Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Sometimes we need a little help with getting things settled down up there so that we can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But yes, the faith to pray more is like, that's all I've been doing is praying and begging God, get me out of this mess. I think trying to just offer advice. Well, if you would do this, or if you would do, I know when I first started, after my really lowest point, and I started going to talk to different people, and different clergy friends of mine, and the good people, love them to death, and they said the same things to me that I had said to church members for 20 years. And I remember sitting there, Cyndee, thinking, gosh, this is so unhelpful.
Oh, no.
It sounded good when I said it, but now I'm on this side of it, and this doesn't help.
Yeah.
And then I thought, gosh, well, did I waste the last 20 years of my life so that I had to work through that? Because that was adding to the lowness. It's like, no, but we don't like feeling helpless. We feel like we have to say something.
Right.
And it's sometimes, like you said, just be there.
Exactly.
But yes, but people don't
leave the counseling to the counselors.
Yeah, and don't shame somebody as if saying, well, it must be your fault because you're not praying enough and you don't have enough faith. Therefore, this is your fault. Because that's what they're hearing.
Right.
Because that's what I was hearing. It was like, gee, thanks. That is so unhelpful.
We want to be helpful. So as we're talking through that, I thought something practical, because I think especially as women, we want to do something practical. Like you said, we want to jump in, we want to help, we want to fix the problem. Men are the same way. They like to be the fixers. But yes, I think there is maybe a way that we can do something practical, and that's to guide them to a solid Christian biblical counselor. And so do you have a few tips on, and we might need one too as well. So this is not just for other people. Ladies, I encourage you, if you are in a tough place, find someone trained that you can talk to. I think we have a stigma around counseling sometimes. Like you talked about earlier, David, it wasn't a normalized thing, and we need to do a little bit more to normalize counseling. So what are some tips you have for how we can find someone? I know sometimes it takes a couple tries, maybe you don't connect with them.
Right.
How do we find a good counselor?
Word of mouth is one thing. Certainly, a search of are there churches in the area that may have a trained counselor on staff. Some of the larger churches do. I will tell you that the primary thing is the actual therapist themselves. And what I mean by that was I did my internship at a community mental health agency. This is a government agency.
Okay.
So immediately people might think, well, that's like a worldly, pagan kind of a place. most of, or if not all of the counselors who work there are solid people of faith. And I know some of the most spiritual conversations I've had about Jesus were in my office at a community government agency.
That's neat.
And I will also tell you that I have previously worked at a place that was a distinctively Christian counseling center.
Mm.
And while I've had, many clients, I had good spiritual conversations. I also had some who came in and said, I don't know that I even believe in God. I don't want to talk about God. And so we honor what the client says.
Okay.
So all that's to say is that it's the qualifications of the particular therapist. And so there may be, if someone is looking around and say, hey, do you have someone on staff who's, who is well grounded in scripture? And I know that where I was at that Christian place, well, David was a former pastor. Oh, I want to see him.
Okay.
And the other women who worked there, I mean, they knew the Bible too, but
that was just different people have kind of a different technique or specialization, and that's their strengths. They have different strengths. That's what it is.
Right. So wherever you're looking, what's the background? What's the experience? I'm looking for somebody that I can have a biblical conversation with to go along with the other counseling, to integrate scripture with the psychotherapy. And who knows where you might find that. More likely at a Christian place, but still, even at a community agency, those people are there because I've seen it here in my own town.
I appreciate you sharing that. I did not realize that. I didn't think about it that way. I just kind of was like, we got to have Christian on the label. But that is a very good point. And I will
it's
also
always up to the client to decide,
which direction
we can't impose our own values on them.
Right. And I will say a lot of churches that we have been members at have lists of counselors that they recommend. Mm-hmm. And so don't wait till you need that list. Go ahead and ask for it so that it's, put it in the notes on your phone or a file that you can pull up, on the cloud or whatever, so that if a need comes up, you can just very much, when you're talking to somebody and they say, I'm having a hard time, I'm struggling. And would you be open to seeing a counselor? Would you like me to send you a list? That you make that an easy yes for them, and you go ahead and you do it immediately. So you don't forget. First of all, we know how life gets. We get busy. We forget to pray when we tell people we're going to pray, but that you've got it, that you can send it right there, and that doesn't delay them taking a response and an action. So if they feel like they're ready, because that in and of itself can be hard, just making that outreach and that call of, okay, I feel like I need to get some help.
Mm-hmm. So we want to. That's a great idea. Yes.
Quicken that process.
We'll have a list of referrals that they know and can trust, and say, here's where you might can go. Yes.
That's a starting point, at least, because it can be really overwhelming if you just Google counselors in my area. You're going to get a really big list. But like you said, if you're willing to share and you ask, I bet you have friends that are in counseling that would be happy to tell you if they recommend their counselor or not. Mm-hmm. So that's another great point. All right, David, I know I've taken a lot of your time this morning, and I appreciate all the things you've shared. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure that you tell women's ministry leaders?
Well, I admire the work that you're doing. If it wasn't for women ministry leaders, then churches would have shut down years ago.
Thank you. On behalf of everyone, we appreciate that very much. That's sweet.
Yes, I used to tell my administrative assistant, I said, I was off for 8 weeks and the church kept on without missing a beat. I said, you were out for 1 week and I thought the walls were going to fall in. So yes, I know who gets things done.
Well, thank you. Yes, we do, just a little bit. Okay, now David, you speak and you go around and you share your story. Now, ladies, I know you may have never even thought about bringing a man to a women's ministry event, but it can be done. Absolutely. And as you've heard David's story, I know you've benefited from it. So think about how your women might benefit as well. So, David, if leaders are interested in getting in touch with you, if they'd like to talk to you about possibly coming and speaking at their church, what's the best way for them to do that?
My email address, which would be David E. Brannock. So DAVIDEBRANNOCK @gmail.com.
Okay.
DavidEBrannock@gmail.com. That would be the best way, and then we can go from there.
Okay, super. Well, I hope some of our leaders will reach out to you and tell us where in the country are you located? Because sometimes we have small budgets and we can't always afford flights and all the things.
I am in Greenville, Tennessee. Knoxville is an hour 15, 20 to my west.
Okay.
Bristol, if people are into NASCAR races, that's an hour the other way. I'm in the mountains of Northeast Tennessee.
Okay, that's good. That's helpful for leaders that are in that kind of circumference to know. So that might just move you up on their list a little bit more. So, David, thank you so much for taking the time to share and talk with us this morning. It has been incredibly helpful.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Cyndee.